The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Yaron Brook Show on this Thursday, May 1st. I am back from my Michigan trip, and for a little while, we'll be doing shows from our regular studio before I travel again. All right, let's jump right into it. We have, I think, a really meaningful court decision today that is definitely going to go to the Supreme Court, or at least be appealed to the Supreme Court. Whether they hear it or not is going to be interesting. It will first have to go to the Fifth Circuit, unless they can find a way around the Fifth Circuit and go straight to the Supreme Court. But this is coming out of the Southern District of Texas. A judge by the name of Fernando Rodriguez, who has been hearing cases relating to the deportation of immigrants under the Alien Enemies Act, the deportation of members of the Tren de Aragua, something like that. Anyway, Judge Rodriguez, who happens to be a Trump administration appointee. So up until now, there's been a lot of discussions about the deportations, and the focus has been primarily on did the deportees get due process, and what should that due process look like, and should they be brought back, and you could argue technical issues around this. But the very heart of the lawsuits trying to stop these deportations has been the question: can the president use the Alien Enemies Act? Can he invoke the Alien Enemies Act to justify these deportations? And this is indeed the first ruling to address this issue. I expect we'll get other rulings from other districts around the country to deal with the same thing, and then I think this will go to appellate courts, and no question, this will ultimately be appealed to the Supreme Court. Anyway, the judge has concluded, and he is the first federal judge to do so, that Trump has exceeded the scope of what the law authorizes a president to do by using it to deport illegal immigrants to El Salvador, to the jails in El Salvador. So just a note from reading from his decision. He writes, neither the court nor the parties question the executive branch's authority and responsibility to enforce federal laws, and along with local law enforcement agencies to protect the nation's population. Neither the court nor the parties question that the executive branch can direct the detention and removal of aliens who engage in criminal activity in the United States. The executive branch has and will continue to rely on the Immigration and Nationality Act to remove aliens found to represent a danger to the country. Right? So you can still deport illegal immigrants. You can still deport people who have committed or engaged in criminal activity under the Immigration and Nationality Act. But that's not what was before the court. So I continue from the opinion. The question that this lawsuit presents is whether the president can utilize a specific statute, the Aliens Enemies Act, to detain and remove Venezuelan aliens who are members of the TDA. As to that question, the historical record renders clear that the president's invocation of the AEA through the proclamation exceeds the scope of the statute and is contrary to the plain, ordinary meaning of the statute's terms. As a result, the court concludes that as a matter of law, the executive branch cannot rely on the AEA based on the proclamation to detain the named petitioners and the certified class, or to remove them from the country. In other words, regular immigration law is still, that's nobody's questioning, at least at this point, nobody's questioning the constitutionality of regular immigration law. Maybe they should, but they're not. But the AEA was designed for a specific purpose and for a specific time. It's not an accident that the AEA has only been used 3 times in American history, all at times of war, and all related to the activities of foreign agents engaged in wartime activity. There is no war here. There is no national security emergency here. Gangs are not foreign agents. Again, there's no war. So they're not enemies in the sense of, an enemy nation. They don't represent an enemy nation. They are illegal immigrants. Maybe they're even criminal illegal immigrants. But then you have plenty of laws on the books today to deal with them. You do not need the AEA, and the AEA should not allow you to, as I think the Trump administration is using it, to, exceed the mandate that existing laws already provide for this kind of stuff. And that's, the speedy deportation and deportation to prisons, to the prison in El Salvador, all justified under this idea of these are enemies and they need to be treated as enemies. So, there's a lot. I'm sure I haven't read the entire case. There's a lot about the particulars of it, but I think, and I've said this before in previous shows, this is the right decision. This is not the kind of act that should be invoked unless it's in a time of war. And it's not clear to me that it's an act that should ever be invoked or that is constitutional to begin with. This is part of the act that John Adams signed into law, the Alien and Sedition Act, that much of which has already been ruled unconstitutional. This piece has been left, but it is not clear whether this piece is legitimate or valid. But it certainly is illegitimate and valid as applied by the Trump administration in this context. So, the judge has thrown it out. It's clear that now the government will appeal this. It's going to appeal it to the a very conservative, heavily conservative, 5th District's 5th Circuit Court, which is, I guess, the southern district, includes Texas and other southern states, very conservative. It's hard to tell how they rule. So far, the conservatives or Trump appointees like Rodriguez are just reading the law. They're looking at the law and they're saying there's nothing in the law that allows Trump to do this. You would expect that to be a conservative interpretation of the law, whether you agree with the deportations or not. It's a question of law. So there's a good chance that the 5th Circuit will uphold Judge Rodriguez's decision. But there's also a possibility that they will find reason to provide the executive branch with more scope and overturn it. Whatever happens at the 5th Circuit, this is likely to go to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court will then have the ability to affirm it or reverse it without even hearing the case, right? So if the 5th, if the 5th Circuit affirms Rodriguez's decision, then the Supreme Court not hearing the case will basically confirm that they believe that is the right decision. If the 5th reverses it and the Supreme Court doesn't do anything, then they're basically saying the 5th Court made the right decision, and the 5th Court will be the deciding factor. So that's one possibility. A second possibility is that the Supreme Court agrees to hear the case and expedites it, and it decides it this term. That is, in the next few months. The term ends first week in July. So in May, this month or next month, we will hear the court and make a decision over it really, really fast. In that case, that's going to be very tight. Third alternative is they take the case and they set it up for next term, which means this is going to be left completely undecided until the fall. So that is another possibility. Now, how this plays out is probably depends on how the Fifth Circuit rules. Now, it could be that the government petitions the Supreme Court to skip the Circuit Court and to take the case immediately because they're going to take the case anyway, right? Or they're going to decide the case one way or another anyway. Now, it could be that the court declines that and leaves it up to the usual process, or it could take the case. Again, interesting to see how this all plays out. But this case is going one way or the other to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will be the final arbitrator of whether the Trump administration can use the Alien Enemies Act for the purposes it is using it today. Now, I don't think this will slow down deportations. It could very well that the slowdown, the deportations will continue other laws that are available. Now, I think his ruling only applies to similar cases in the Southern District of Texas. So in every other district, there are 94 federal districts. In any other district that is facing deportations, plaintiffs are going to have to file to get a judge to make a decision about whether it's legit or not, at least until the Supreme Court rules, and then it becomes kind of a national standard, right? So that is where we are. It is a super interesting case. It's going to be super interesting to see how the court rules on it. I think this will very much determine to what extent the court is truly independent of Trump, because I think on the merits, this one should be pretty easy. I don't think the Aliens Enemies Act is is being appropriately used here. So on the merits, I think the courts will rule against it. We will see if the courts stick to the merits. So far, for the most part, the court has been good on this, but we'll see how it develops. Now, there are a number of other really, really interesting cases that are going to go before the courts. And we're going to have either Larry Salzman or maybe Ilya Somin. We're going to have somebody maybe next week to come in and talk about some of the court cases. In particular, there's a court case that is going up right now with regard to the tariffs and the use of the International Economic Emergency Powers Act. And this is, I think, there are a number of lawsuits around this, 5 or 6 or 7, I'm not sure. The Pacific Legal Foundation has filed one of those lawsuits. So Larry Salzman, who is, he would be great to talk about that. He's at PLF. So anyway, the first of these is going to go in front of the Court of International Trade, where they are going to have all arguments on May 13th, so in a couple of weeks. But there's a number of these cases in front of, I think, a number of different courts. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. The lawsuit, again, I think, has very, very strong merits. I think that based on this, the tariffs should be overturned and could be overturned. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. Of course, whatever the Court of International Trade does, or whatever any kind of district courts, federal district courts do, it'll be appealed, and it'll be appealed again. So the Supreme Court will decide at the end of the day whether the use of tariffs under this particular law is appropriate. Remember, and there are a number of different challenges here, not just that they're using it based on this law, but whether this is a violation of the Constitution, because the authority to raise taxes, which tariffs are, lays with Congress and not with the executive branch. So there'll be a challenging of the executive branch's ability to do tariffs in the way that Trump has done, kind of globally, universally, and not on national security grounds. The other big issue that is out there, so that's one issue. The other big issue that is out there is whether federal judges have the ability, when declaring some action of the Trump administration, in this case, inappropriate, whether they can issue national injunctions. In other words, whether they can stop this from happening, like the immigration case, everywhere in the country, or whether as a district judge, you can only issue it as relevant to what is happening in your district. Now this is going to go directly to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court on the 15th, I think, of May, is going to consider whether to crack down on judges' power to check the administration in precisely this way by issuing nationwide injunctions. The justices are going to hear all arguments by the Trump administration's, based on Trump administration's request to overturn a whole series of nationwide injunctions currently halting the Trump's executive order, for example, to end birthright citizenship. So they're not going to decide on the issue of birthright citizenship. They're going to decide really on the principle of whether these judges have the authority to make these injunctions across the country, not just, again, applying to their particular district that they are in functioning. The administration has asked the court to, quote, prevent universal injunctions from becoming universally acceptable, so that the court's handling of issues is being closely watched by lawyers everywhere in the country, because now your whole legal strategy is going to change based on how the Supreme Court rules. Anyway, these are two very big cases. One at the Court of International Trade, the other one at the Supreme Court. Of course, the Supreme Court one will dictate whether, for example, the Court of International Trade and other courts will be able to stop tariffs completely even before it gets to the Supreme Court. So these have vast ramifications, and it's going to be really interesting. It would be amazing if the courts ruled that what Trump is doing with tariffs is unconstitutional, if they basically returned the authority to increase tariffs or to establish tariffs to Congress, gave them the explicit responsibility based on the Constitution. If the courts did that and all the tariffs that Trump has done so far just disappear, and now Congress has to deal with it, that is a huge win. That would be a huge win. And again, it will be the courts that save us from the irrationality and the whimsical nature, whim-driven nature of the Trump administration. So let's hope the court rules the right way. All right. In the last few hours, first there were rumors, then there were the reality became real, that Mike Waltz, who is Trump's national security advisor, has basically lasted in that position 100 days and was fired today. He and his deputy were both fired. Now, Waltz, in order to keep him on the team and not to alienate him too much from the Trump administration, has been offered and has taken the position of UN ambassador. So he will be nominated for that. I think Congress has to approve that, but he will be nominated for that. And they will begin a search for a new national security advisor. In the meantime, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, will serve as the national security advisor until somebody new will be appointed. At some point this morning, rumors were that Witkoff, the guy who's running around negotiating all the deals with Iran, with Hamas, and with Russia and Ukraine, would become the national security advisor. This in spite of the fact that I read stories earlier in the week about how many people within the Trump administration have come to the conclusion that Witkoff is a not very competent, let's put it that way, is not very competent and is ignorant and doesn't know what he's doing and has jeopardized the Iran deal, peace deal with Russia, and has not really achieved what was set out to be achieved with Hamas in Gaza. So the people within the administration are very skeptical of Witkoff, but now Trump might give him a promotion. We'll see. That has not happened yet. So let's not count on that. But it is meaningful that Mike Waltz is being kicked out. Mike Waltz was considered, when he was appointed to this position, to be one of the few, very, very, very few, independent voices within the Trump administration. He was somebody who people talked about as actually somebody who knowing something about foreign policy, knew national security. He's a former congressman. Somebody who would be willing to challenge Trump and not just follow along. Also, he was considered the guy who would kind of offset the kind of the new rights perspective, the MAGA perspective, non-intervention. We don't want to support Ukraine. We don't want to bomb Iran. We want to back away from the world. We want to stop being engaged in actively pursuing our self-defense. We want to hunker down. That is MAGA's position. That's J.D. Vance's position. J.D. Vance was against even attacking the Houthis, very much against attacking Iran, very much against allowing Netanyahu to attack Iran, and very opposed to Zelensky and to Ukraine, and very supportive of Russia. One of the reasons maybe that the Trump-Zelensky meeting at the Vatican went well is because J.D. Vance wasn't there. J.D. Vance is a destructive force. Waltz, who was considered more of call it a hawk, somebody who was very aware of the Iranian threat and wanted to do something about it, not a deal, but to actually use military force, was one of the proponents of bombing the Houthis and destroying them, was much more pro-Ukraine than the rest of MAGA, and is considered, he and his deputy considered, really big-time China hawks, is now gone. And really now they were the last independent voices out there, advocating for positions that are not 100% consistent with Laura Loomer's perspective on foreign policy. Because as we know, Laura Loomer, I think that's her name, is, a world-class specialist in foreign policy. Indeed, she is responsible, by accounts I keep reading, for the fact that others within the National Security Council and the NSA were fired a few weeks ago because she came to Trump with a whole list of people who she described as basically disloyal to Trump. And because she didn't like their positions, they weren't consistent enough with MAGA positions, and she got them all fired. So Donald Trump gets his advice about who he should listen to regarding national security issues from the brilliant Laura Loomer. It's pretty insane. If you've ever seen some of her tweets, if you've ever read anything she's written, if you ever watched this woman in action, she is a mindless MAGA conspiracy theory nutcase, a complete and utter nutcase. And she has Trump's ear. She's the one that Trump listens to about national security appointments. And it's very likely, or it is likely, that she was involved also in this Mike Waltz firing and dismissal. But basically what's happening is the White House is hunkering down on the MAGA foreign policy. They are doubling up on it. They will, and they are making sure that everybody who is advising Donald Trump on national security issues is consistent with MAGA and loyal to the president, and will not undermine in any way his particular agenda. This is really, really damaging, really, really bad for America to get some of these independent, better voices, people with experience who actually understand what's going on. Now, remember, Waltz kind of left an opening to be fired because he was the guy on Signal Gate who actually, one of his aides, I think, was the one who added the Atlantic reporter to the group that was discussing classified information. But so he left himself open. But at the time, Trump supported him. But it seems like a number of people within the administration didn't like him. But most importantly, that his, call it, traditional hawkish views on national security in the end caused tension between him and the MAGA non-interventionist, hunker down, leave the world perspective of J.D. Vance and many others within. So yeah, both it's Waltz and his number two who is had similar views. He did. Alex Wong, who was his number two. All right. Anything else I want to say about Waltz? No. I mean, this is going to be a quick news briefing, so we're going to go pretty fast here. And then I'll go to your questions. It'll be a quick show because, just to want to remind you quickly, that we do have an interview tonight, 7 p.m. I know it's not Monday, it's Thursday, but we have an interview tonight with Phil Magnus, who is one of the best people out there, one of the best economists out there discussing tariffs and trade. He knows the stuff inside out. He's researched it. He's a real expert. So if you have questions about tariffs, trade, the history of tariffs, the history of trade, Phil is the guy to ask. So join us tonight, 7 p.m. East Coast time, 7 p.m. East Coast time. And I've got a lot of questions for him. I'd like to dig into the history. How do we know, like, that the McKinley tariffs were bad for America? How do we even evaluate that? What kind of so we're going to talk about economic research and economic history and how to evaluate what Trump is doing. So he is an actual expert. I know experts are out of favor these days, but he's a real one. He's not a pretend one. All right. So yesterday, was it yesterday or the day before yesterday? I can't keep track now. Ukraine and the United States signed the Ukrainian minerals deal. We'll get into some of what that does, although the details are still, we don't know the full details of the deal, but the deal has been signed. So I've been reading up a little bit about this, and one of the things that's really interesting about this deal was that I thought, and I guess I just assumed, because I didn't have any knowledge of this, but I just assumed this was a deal that Trump had proposed. That the deal was something Trump proposed in order to, get something back for the support of Ukraine, which was very, very unpopular with his base. Like, MAGA does not like the idea of militarily supporting Ukraine. And I thought, okay, Trump has come up with this clever way of getting a something in return for that. It turns out I was wrong. It does happen, even though I, too, am an expert. Sometimes I get things wrong. Anyway, it turns out this was Zelensky's idea. And Zelensky, you see, I keep learning more things about Zelensky and I like him more and more with time. Like, Zelensky realized what he was facing with Donald Trump. He saw that kind of antagonism that Trump and MAGA had towards Ukraine. And he tried to figure out some way to change the dynamics, to get Trump, at least, and maybe MAGA, on his side by offering them something of value in return. The guy's a traitor. So before the election, before the inauguration, but once Trump was elected, Zelensky actually met with Trump in the Trump Tower and actually proposed this. Now, this is just days after kind of Trump dismissed Zelensky as the greatest salesman in history for convincing the U.S. to bankroll his defense of Ukraine. So Trump suggested that he wasn't going to do the same thing. But once Zelensky offered this minerals deal, Trump was interested. Now, this is this is a meeting before the election. So Zelensky's really planting the seeds before the election. Now, we've all followed the negotiations of this, the crazy and ruthless nature of this negotiation, the demands, the almost signing, not signing, the why didn't you wear a suit today, all of that, and why didn't you say thank you many, many, many times. All of that, we saw all of that, and the fact that it ultimately got to a point where it got signed is a little surprising, but it did, and everybody says, it seems to say, that the breakthrough came in the Trump-Zelensky meeting at the Vatican, which I think you've seen pictures of, where the two of them are sitting there in St. Peter's, all by themselves, just the two of them. Both are leaning in and talking to one another intently. In this meeting, supposedly, Zelensky said that he told Trump that he was ready to seal the deal. And, this is probably, that conversation probably got it done. And the deal was indeed signed yesterday, the day before yesterday. Anyway, Zelensky achieved what he wanted to achieve, because what does this deal do for Zelensky? Well, basically what it does is, William, one more, do not, no one cares, and I'm going to block you from the channel, which might be fine for you, but, everybody who's listening here is on the show because they care. So if you don't care, you can leave. Please do. But stop monopolizing the chat with your nonsense. This is really a big coup for Ukraine in the end. Because what does this do? It basically aligns the interests of the United States with Ukraine. In order for Ukraine to continue to get American support, it needed to provide Trump and MAGA with something that they could point to as self-interest. Defending the West, defending Europe, preventing Putin from winning, holding back authoritarianism, fighting evil. None of that appeal to either Trump or MAGA. Trump and MAGA is, uninterested in abstract returns on investment. What they demand is a material, instant gratification kind of return on investment. Right. So this provides the United States with a financial incentive to keep Ukraine going. Now, the problem with these kind of things is that if Putin offers Trump a better deal, then Trump could dissolve this deal and shift to Putin's deal, right? That is definitely a possibility and definitely a risk. But, there's a cost to Trump doing that. And at least for now, Trump has signed a deal that commits the United States to supporting the development of mining in Ukraine, where the United States will be a 50-50 owner in a pool of the revenue that includes the revenue from this mining deal. It sounds like 50% of the revenue from the mining deal goes into this pool. This pool is owned, controlled, 50% by Ukraine and 50% by the United States. And then the United States can use this money to invest in Ukraine, or it can use this money to pay itself, to pay for, U.S. arms, or it can use that to pay for U.S. Just pay it back to the U.S. Treasury, I guess. But it puts the United States in a position where it now has an interest in the UK's long-term success. Now, the U.S. always had an interest in the Ukrainians' long-term success, but now that interest is material rather than intellectual or ideological or a values orientation. It is appropriate for a president who cannot think conceptually, who cannot elevate himself above the perceptual level. It is appropriate for him to do a deal that deals with the perceptual level, that deals with the concrete reality, that does not involve concepts like freedom and long-term security and long-term interests of the United States, but is something that can be quoted in dollars and cents. Now, exactly the nature of the deal, how this is all going to work, how long it's going to take to even implement, because think about this. A lot of this stuff, this is regarding things like aluminum, lithium, titanium, graphite, oil, and natural gas. These are all things that are included in this. Any one of those projects to start extracting this involves years of, finding the resource, mining it, and exporting it. I don't know if they're also going to refine these products locally. But this is not easy. This is not easy. Now it's going to be interesting to see how Trump and J.D. Vance and Witkoff's rhetoric about Ukraine, if it changes at all as a consequence of this, right? If it changes at all as a consequence. And whether this will lead the United States to more significantly support the Ukrainians, provide them with the kind of weapons they need in order to defend themselves and ultimately kick the Russians out of their territory, or whether this is just going to be a blimp and it's not going to change the trajectory of all this. Right? I think there's no accident the United States agreed to this deal in spite of the fact that some of the deal is not what the U.S. wanted originally. At the same time as they seem to be souring on Putin, where Putin seems to be resisting their attempts to actually achieve any kind of reasonable peace agreement. This doesn't give Ukraine exactly what they wanted. They wanted an explicit security guarantee from the United States. But as everybody seems to be saying, both the Americans and the Ukrainians, this constitutes an implicit security guarantee. Right? An implicit security guarantee whereby the United States, because it now has an economic interest in Ukraine, will help defend Ukraine in order to secure its economic interest. Now, whether that'll hold, whether that'll survive, Trumpism, Trump doesn't seem to particularly have respect for deals, even deals he signs. But we will see. It at least gives him something to point at as an achievement, something to point at to his following as a reason to support Ukraine. We'll see in the days to come, as more information comes out, the exact nature of the deal and what is actually being achieved or not. All right, finally, yesterday we found out from the Bureau of Economic Analysis that the American economy has shrunk in the first 3 months of the year by 0.3%, right? The first quarter of 2025, mostly under Trump, we have seen the economy shrink. Now, a recession technically is 2 quarters in a row of negative GDP growth. That is, the economy shrinking 2 quarters in a row is technically defined as a recession. So we're not there yet. Now note that the first quarter of the year ended March 30th. Liberation Day was what, April 2nd or April 4th? I can't remember. Anyway, it was in April. So this does not include that round of tariffs. It does not include 145% tariffs on China, and it doesn't include the consequence of that. This is just the expectation of tariffs. Supposedly led to the 0.3% decrease in GDP. Now, it's important to note here that this number is going to be revised. These numbers are always revised. And if you remember, when the number was revised, for example, positively, everybody accused Biden of playing with numbers. When it was revised negatively, everybody accused Biden of playing with numbers because, you know, he was trying to cover up the bad numbers in the past. Anyway, it'll be interesting to see how people react when Trump administration revises these numbers. They will be revised. That's always happens. Calculating GDP, even by the calculation that the government has, is complicated. The data is not, completely accurate. It takes time to figure out how accurate it is. So this is just a first attempt. And given that it's only 0.3%, it wouldn't surprise me if at the end of the day, we got a number that was actually positive growth in the first quarter. But what's clear is the economy slowed. That is, if we project onto Biden economy, i.e. last year, the economy was growing at 2+% pretty steadily. This is the first negative number since, 2022, I think. And it's a significant slowing from the Biden administration. Trump, when the stock market was up and everything was going well in late January, said that it was all caused by the Trump economy, the prospects for the Trump economy. Now, when the stock market is down quite a bit and where GDP is negative, he is blaming it wholeheartedly, all of it, on Biden. Now, one of the explanations, and this is, I wanted to make this clear because this is so deceptive and so wrong. One of the explanations for why GDP growth is negative is because imports were exceedingly high in the first quarter. They were actually astoundingly high. Imports went up by 41%. It's like an unheard of amount. The only other time they've gone up this much was just after COVID, when we were recovering from COVID, and suddenly the world markets opened up and Americans imported all the stuff after everything was closed for a long period of time. So 41%, an astounding number. And since imports are deducted from GDP, everybody's saying, see, imports are bad because we deduct them from GDP, and imports are what cause GDP to go down. But that is technically BS. That is complete and utter nonsense. What happens is that imports are double counted, and therefore you have to deduct them in order to get at domestic production. GDP calculates domestic production. Gross domestic product is an attempt to calculate how much is produced in America, and it does so by calculating how much we consume. But some of what we consume is being imported. So you have to take that out in order to calculate the end, how much do we produce? And the fact that imports went up a lot also means that on the other side of the equation, we consumed a lot of it. That is, GDP captured that number, right? Captured that number in the consumption number. Either the consumption of individuals, consumers, who bought stuff from China and from Europe or wherever, expecting tariffs, and therefore they bought a bunch of stuff. And then it's captured in individual consumption. So then you want to take it out so that you only get the domestic production. Consumption here is a proxy for production because everything consumes has to be produced. Or businesses bought all this stuff and put it into inventory, which is also captured in GDP. And you want to subtract the imports from that in order to get, again, a domestic production. So this is not the fault of imports. The imports affect the consumption side and the consumption side and the importation side. It's neutral. The GDP number ultimately is neutral of imports. It reflects domestic production. And so we're going to see. So the point of this is that domestic production went down 0.3%. Now, it could be, again, that there are all kinds of errors of measurement involved. It could be that the economy shrunk more than 0.3%. That's probably less likely that the economy did better than negative 0.3% because the measurement errors usually go in the other direction given the way this is calculated and given the impact that imports had on the calculation of the number. So what is likely is that the economy grew very slowly last quarter, but probably grew. Probably grew. Now, what is really going to be interesting is what this number, GDP growth, looks like for the second quarter, the post-Liberation Day quarter. And here, economists are projecting negative economic growth. That is significant negative economic growth, a real slowdown in the economy, resulting from the uncertainty that the tariffs created, resulting in the dramatic drop in imports. A significant portion of imports are used for domestic production. So the inability to import significantly reduces domestic production, so GDP should fall. So we can expect GDP maybe to go down in the first quarter. But we'll see. We'll see how it's corrected this quarter and exactly how the math flows. Long term, it does seem like we're in for a period of low to negative economic growth. This is definitely going to be a period that we're heading to because of the uncertainty that Trump is engaged in, the lack of any real progress on cutting government spending, the slowness of any deregulation that is actually happening, and the actual effect of the tariffs. I think the combination of all those things suggests that we're heading into a period of stagnation. Exactly how it plays out is hard to tell. But we did get, for the first time, a negative number. A negative number. All right. That is the abbreviated news for today, May 1st. It's a Thursday. And we will have more news for you tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a longer news show. We will cover the news in more detail. A few announcements. First, we're going to have I think it's going to be fantastic. We're going to have Phil Magnus today to talk about trade. Now, if you want to ask him about GDP, he's actually tweeting quite a bit about the meaning of these numbers and what it actually means, and whether imports actually drag down growth. No, they didn't. But you can ask him questions about that. Highly encourage you to listen and to show up and to ask questions. He is a real expert on tariffs and trade, and will give you I think some, a lot of stuff backed up by his research. So first-handed stuff, right? He's the kind of guy I read to know what's going on or to know about the economic history of America. You can get it directly from him. He's just an expert on the left's argument that slavery is what made America rich, right? Exploitation of slaves. He debunks that. So he's great at, no, free markets are what made us rich. To the extent that we weren't free, we were less rich. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be a terrific interview today, 7 o'clock. We'll have about an hour and a half. So, he's not going to be here indefinitely. So if you plan to come early, ask lots of questions early so I can figure out when to stop my interview and start his answering your questions. All right, I want to remind everybody who's watching right now that this show is supported by listeners and viewers like you. Please consider asking a question, a super chat question, or doing a sticker. Super chat questions, particularly $20 questions or $50 questions or more, are very, very welcome at this point. We've got one $20 questions and a bunch of $5 and $10 questions, so and a couple of twos. So please consider doing some 2050. We've got a long way to reach even our first hour goal, and we've only got 9 minutes to get there. So 9 minutes to get the first hour goal. And basically, we have to do $150 in those 9 minutes to make the first hour goal, to achieve the first hour goal. Let's get May off to a decent start here by at least getting that goal. So please consider doing a sticker or a question as a value for value. You get value from listening to the show. This is how you can pay me back. All right, that is. I wanted to also remind you that we have Alex Epstein is a sponsor of this show. Alex has alexepstein.substack.com. That is where he publishes his talking points, his ideas, his position papers. He's got, for example, he's got this great article, the Energy Freedom Plan, 112 specific actions the new administration can take to unleash American energy. It's excellent, and it's 112. Think about the detail he goes into. You will learn a lot by following this. Also, right now, there are 38 House members who are asking Congress to terminate every single subsidy that was granted to industry under the Inflation Reduction Act that passed under Biden. Only 38 subsidies are almost impossible to get rid of because there are pressure groups, there are interest groups that get involved and try to make sure that they get them. So in spite of massive lobbying, there are 38 House members that are calling to terminate all these IRA subsidies. This is, as far as I can tell, a project that Alex initiated. If you want to read about it, what it's going to take to get this passed, what Alex is doing to promote it, who he's reaching out to, all the details, you can find that on alexepstein.substack.com. So there's no better source to understand energy policy right now and it's the upside and what will happen if we don't engage in the upside than Alex Epstein. So follow him and follow him today. Don't wait. And finally, the Ayn Rand Institute has scholarships available for OCON this year, for the Objectives Conference this year in Boston, July 1st through 5th. You can apply at aynrand.org/start here, aynrand.org/start here. You can apply and get a scholarship. So if you're a serious student of Objectivism, you're really studying the ideas, and you can't afford to come, the Ayn Rand Institute will consider giving you a scholarship to come. So no cost to apply. aynrand.org/start here. No guarantee you'll get it, but there's no cost to apply. All right, let's see. Let's jump in with questions. Again, I'm encouraging you to submit questions, to engage in stickers and super chats. Jennifer says, thank you again for visiting Michigan with the manure smell, crazy weather, deer in headlights, and Michigan left turns. Seriously, we all had a great time. Yeah, I had a great time too. It was really good. I think the video of my talk on Western civilization and the Enlightenment will be available hopefully next week. We'll be able to get it up onto the channel and you can view it. So I will let you know when that happens. It was very well received. The president of the university, this is Northwood University, where I gave the talk, was actually on Twitter tweeting about how much he liked the lecture, and then tweeting today about how much he liked my book, Free Market Revolution, which he picked up at the lecture. So he's giving me some phenomenal free press. It's amazing. It's the only president of a university that I've ever had such a positive response from publicly. So yeah, it's great. Northwood is somewhere where I think we should invest quite a bit. We can get some of those students engaged with Objectivism and Ayn Rand, get some of them to study at Ayn Rand University. I taught 2 classes and did the lecture in the evening. The 2 classes that I taught was mainly Q&A. We didn't get on video, unfortunately, but the lecture was on video. And then I also taught at the Henry Ford Academy, which is a school in the Ford Motors kind of compound, I guess, in the area just adjacent to the Henry Ford Museum. So yeah, a really productive and really good visit in Michigan. Well, Observateur Persch, I must be mispronouncing that, came in with $50. Thank you. That leaves us $100 to make it to our 1 hour goal. And we only have 3 minutes to get there. I don't know. Might not happen. All right, Observateur says, is it evil to hope that ignorant individuals suffer from being ignorant? No, that would be to say you're evil because you want reality to, the reality to be reality. So ignorant individuals, first of all, do suffer for being ignorant. What you kind of want is to see the suffering, is to make it visible. And I think it's an act of justice. And I think you're being generous by calling them ignorant. I assume most of these people, it's not an issue of ignorance. It's an issue of evasion and therefore an issue of morality. But yeah, I don't think it's evil. Now, it could be evil if they're just innocently ignorant and you want them to really suffer. But if you just want visible evidence of the fact that reality works, that morality works, and again, I don't like the word ignorant because I don't think it's ignorance. I think there's much more going on. In that you want to see the consequence of their ignorance, then yeah, I think that could be justice rather than being evil. But again, somebody ignorant who is innocently ignorant and who's not done anything immoral and who is not evading, but he's just making a mistake, how much suffering do you really want them to experience? Probably not a lot. But it's the evaders that you want to see them suffer. I get that. That is the woefully blind. That is you want evidence that, yeah, not that there is a God, but there is that reality, yeah, works in a sense. That it's actually, bad people have bad lives. Ignorance by tribal fellowship is evasion. It is willful blindness. And yeah, hoping that they suffer the consequences, which they will. We know they will. But that there's evidence and you can see it. I don't think is evil at all. At all. Thank you, Observateur, for the $50. Really, really appreciate that. We have $67 still to go. All right. $77 still to go. Do you see, this is Michael, do you see all the tariffs Trump imposed being removed either by an act of Congress, a Supreme Court ruling, or the following administration eliminating them? Well, I don't think it's going to be an act of Congress. They actually had a vote on Rand Paul's proposal, and it was 49 to 49. He could only get 3 Republicans, including himself, to vote for the proposition. One Republican probably would have voted for it, was absent, so it was a Democrat who probably would have voted for it, was absent. But it's still at 49 to 49, so it was dismissed. So I don't think Congress will do it. I think a Supreme Court could. Not all the tariffs, but certainly the sweeping tariffs, the liberation tariffs, those would be eliminated. Would a future administration won't eliminate all of them? I'm pretty sure of that. You saw that with Biden. He didn't eliminate any of Trump's tariffs. They might eliminate some, depending on what's going on. But look, statists are statists. And when they get into power, they often want to use the tariffs themselves. They often want to use the powers that the tariffs gives them for the cronyism and for power over other countries and power over their different business groups. So, no, I wouldn't count on future administrations eliminating them. Michael said, instead of tariffs, why not tax cuts for companies building and manufacturing in America? Well, because there's a sense in which that's what Biden did. He subsidized it, and he also gave them tax write-offs. Trump hates imports. He hates trade deficits. His purpose is not necessarily building and manufacturing in America. As I said, Biden had more success at that than Trump is going to have by subsidizing it. Not that I support that, I don't, but he had more success at it. Trump is motivated by pure, unadulterated ignorance of economics. And he has the most ignorant economist in America today, Peter Navarro, advising him. And so tariffs, as Trump has said, tariffs are a beautiful thing. They love tariffs. So the other options are not on the table. They might do that as well, but they're not going to give up on tariffs because tariffs are a beautiful thing. Hopper Campbell, does objectivism get any credit for humanity not engaging in a third world war, collapsing into communism so far? I don't know. I mean, that's a lot. I think it gets some credit for a shift to the right that happened in the 70s. It gets some credit for the kind of continuation of generally deregulation and classical liberal policies economically through the Clinton years. I don't think it gets credit for collapsing preventing the world collapsing into communism or preventing a third world war. I don't think objectivism had that much influence. James, do you foresee a lot of free market prime ministers popping up in South America or Asia over the next 50 years? Will change happen in different pockets of the world at different times? Yeah, I definitely think change will happen in different pockets of the world at different times. You see that with Milei. Do I see them popping up? I don't, because I just don't see the people. Milei's been around for a while. It was a surprise that he popped up, so I don't necessarily expect more surprises. They might happen, inspired by him, but it's not clear that people are gaining the right inspiration from him. They're associating him too much with MAGA rather than with free markets. So I don't know, and I don't know where the next Milei is or where he's going to pop up. Richard, keep up the good work. Thank you. $100. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you. We reached our 1 hour goal. We still got that second hour goal, but at least we reached the 1 hour goal. Thank you, Richard, for making that possible. Rajesh, thank you for the sticker. Jack, thank you for the sticker. Donna, thank you. Who do we have here? We had Catherine, I saw, did a couple of stickers. Yeah, Catherine did a couple. James Taylor, thank you. Ollie, thank you. Alan, thank you. John Glue, Ryan Ward. All right, guys, really, really appreciate the support. Thank you, guys. Okay, Michael says, Rattlesnake TV just sent you another email. Yes, I'll get back to them. James, if you give Trump an F, what would you grade Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton? First 100 days or the whole presidency? Bill Clinton, let's just take an economic perspective, because if we start, everything else, it's very hard. I mean, Bill Clinton will get a C. Ronald Reagan would probably get a C plus, B minus. On foreign policy, Clinton would get a D or a D plus, something like that. Primarily because he didn't go after bin Laden. Ronald Reagan on foreign policy would get God, what a mixed bag. A C plus, B minus again. Yeah. Just if we're grading. So I'd have to, devote a little bit of thought to thinking about all. I mean, problem with Reagan is you could give him an F because his presidency destroyed the Republican Party by bringing in the moral majority. You could argue that Ronald Reagan made Trump possible. And certainly Ayn Rand gave him an F. Ayn Rand despised Reagan and thought he was a disaster for the Republican Party because he brought religion smack into the middle of it. It made it a crucial, intimate part of the Republican Party. How do you calculate that versus the good he did economically, the good and bad he did foreign policy-wise? Yeah. Nobody gets an A. The last president who might have gotten an A is Grover Cleveland, I think, in the 19th century, late 19th century. This century, 20th century, nobody gets an A. I mean, Coolidge might get a B plus on the economy, and then a D on, Coolidge was terrible. He passed the worst immigration bill in American history. He increased tariffs. So on some fronts, Coolidge was absolutely terrible. Some fronts, he was okay. But he doesn't get an A. He gets at best a B and probably more of a B minus. Is Trump just an old New York Democrat? Yeah, I mean, he always has been. Ideologically, to the extent he has any ideology, he is a old-style New York Democrat. He has much more in common policy-wise with Schumer than he does with, I don't know, again, domestically, with Rand Paul. Not your average algorithm. What's with all the anti-Semites in Ireland? The amount I've come across is insane. Is it because Ireland is super Catholic? I think it's two things. I think it's the fact that they're Catholics, and the Catholics, of course, invented anti-Semitism, perfected it, and brought it to the forefront and made it a huge part of their culture. And then second, that they associate Palestinian, they're altruists. They take their altruism seriously, and they consider the Palestinians being oppressed equivalent to themselves being oppressed by the British. So they think of Israel vis-a-vis the Palestinians as equivalent to the English vis-a-vis the Irish. And so they supposedly think of themselves as sympathetic to oppressed nations because they've been oppressed. They know what it's like. That is the reason, excuse, or whatever you want to call it, as far as I can tell. Now, there might be other aspects, features of Irish culture, Irish intellectuals. They're quite leftist on cultural issues. Which might explain some of it. So, again, the altruism, the intersectionality, the who's being oppressed, who's the oppressor, who's the oppressed, colonialism, all of that. But I'd have to study more closely what's happening in Ireland to figure that out. Blaze guitar lessons. Many historians argue the United States became a world superpower because it started and funded its free public education system. Is there any truth to this? No, I don't think there is. There was plenty of education going on before the state got involved in it. And there was no necessity for the state to get in it. Education was growing. Parents were gaining the wealth to send their kids to education. A lot of the education was private, and some of it was free. Churches and other non-profits were formed in order to provide the education. The state had no business and no real reason to get involved. I mean, that actually might be an interesting question to ask tonight, to ask Phil Magnus. He might know kind of the historical details of all of that. But no, there's absolutely zero reason to believe that. There was plenty of private education, and it was growing. Indeed, by providing free public education, it crowded out the private education and basically destroyed it. And we would be much better off if we'd stuck to the private education system. Esoteric dichotomy. Hey, Yaron, my dad and I talked about AI automation. Many Americans dislike, resent work and would rather just live off of UBI. Would be a sad future, very sad. But it's also possible that as AI comes in, people will find work that is more satisfying, that they actually like, and they do that instead. So it might be an opportunity for people to rethink work, rethink what they have to do for work, and engage in things that are more fun, more interesting, more challenging, more stimulating. I mean, this is part of the problem of the whole bringing the manufacturing jobs back. Who the hell wants to go work in a textile mill? Almost nobody. Because they've got better jobs, pay better, and are less physically intense. So jobs in America have improved, and AI will improve them again. And maybe as they improve, more people will embrace the idea that work is good. But if people rely more on welfare, which is what UBI is at the end of the day, that'll be a very bad outcome. We'll talk about that topic some more in the future because it's an important topic to talk about, the whole AI UBI question. There's some interesting people. A lot of people support this idea that jobs are going to be destroyed, so we're going to have to impose a UBI. We'll talk about that in the future. The more rational left believes that solar will replace oil, gas, and nuclear, and it will be reliable. When could solar and wind replace oil permanently? Well, I don't know that it can, but if it's going to, I don't know if it can ultimately, but if it's going to, the one thing that has to happen, the precondition for this, is that you get really, really, really high density, large, high density, very, very, very cheap batteries. Because the reality is that solar doesn't work at night. Duh. It doesn't work when it's cloudy. It doesn't work in a variety of different conditions. And the windmills don't work when it's not windy. So you have to be able to store vast quantities of electricity cheaply so that when it's dark or when it's not windy, you can then, use the batteries. Now, is it possible to get batteries that cheap, that big, that fast? I don't know. And I don't know the physics of it enough. and I don't know when it'll happen. We're far, far, far from it. We still, even systems that have a lot of use of solar energy, like Spain, the use of solar energy also makes them vulnerable to blackouts, which is what we just saw in Spain and Portugal, probably caused by over-reliance on solar energy. Now, Spain is super sunny, so solar energy makes sense in Spain more than probably anywhere else. So imagine, if Spain has a hard time, what other countries are going to go through. But yeah, I mean, again, you're going to need very cheap, high density, high quality, and large battery power, and we're far, far from achieving that. Aaron, and you're going to have to use up a lot of land because solar takes up a lot of land. Aaron, how do you reconcile your support for Israel and Ukraine with the fact that they draft their own citizens forcefully? I support these countries geopolitically, but can't get over the mandatory draft. Well, here's the question. Would you support America if America had a draft? That is, if you lived, I don't know how old you are, in the 1960s, would you be a supporter of America? Or would you say, the draft is so evil, I withdraw all support from the United States of America? And Ayn Rand didn't. So Ayn Rand hated the draft, spoke up against the draft, was ultimately instrumental in getting rid of the draft, but she didn't withdraw her entire support of the United States of America because of this one evil. It's evil. It's wrong. But so is taxation, certainly at the levels we have it today. So are a lot of things. So is regulations. I mean, civil forfeiture, where they take your money. If they find money in your car, they can take your car. If they arrest you. I mean, there's so many evils that the government does. Why are you picking one over many others? Now, a draft is particularly evil. Okay, but does that wipe out all the other freedoms that exist? All the other goodness that might exist? I don't think so. So that is true of, Europe. Many countries in Europe have conscription. It's true of Israel. It's true of Ukraine. And it was true of the United States in the 1960s. And I'm not saying because Ayn Rand supported America, you should too. I'm just saying she was very critical. She was very critical. And yet, she continues to support America. You can do that. You can be very critical of something and continue to support America. And, when I'm in Israel, I actively engage in discussions about a volunteer army, about how we get rid of a draft, how we get rid of the conscription. There's not much receptivity to that these days, given the existential threat that Israel faces. And look, look, of all the drafts and conscriptions out there in the world, the least bad on Ukraine and Israel. Why? Because Ukraine and Israel face an existential threat. Like the United States and Vietnam did not face an existential threat and we had a draft. Switzerland has a draft, doesn't face an existential threat. But Israel and Ukraine could be wiped out if they didn't have a draft. Now, I would argue they deserve to be wiped out if they can't get a big enough volunteer army to defend themselves. But I wouldn't use that, particularly for countries that are facing the existential threat, as the issue that wipes out all their virtues because of the one sin. All right, Eric, several years ago, Rite Aid announced that they would no longer sell tobacco. Their rationale was essentially that they sell medicine and tobacco is basically poison. Could this be seen as ESG? If not, how is it different? Well, I don't know. I don't think it was motivated by ESG. I think it was motivated by a good business decision. That is, a business decision that said, we only want to sell products that enhance human life. And they came to the conclusion that tobacco didn't enhance human life. Right or wrong, you could argue that. and therefore decided not to sell it. I think that can be a very smart, rational, long-term business decision. Maybe it was motivated by ESG. I don't know. But there's nothing wrong with doing things that are good for your customers, that promote your customers' health, that avoid harming your customers. Indeed, these are good things. So there's no question there are elements of ESG, and I don't like to call it elements of ESG because ESG is such a racket. But there are elements of ESG that are completely rational in the company's self-interest. Companies are not about short-term profit at all costs. They can have a moral goal and a moral purpose of doing things that do not harm their customers, even if the customers are willing to self-harm. Like, imagine we legalized cocaine and we legalized heroin. A lot of stores would not sell it, in spite of the fact that it was legal, because they would deem it as, if I sell it, I'm basically telling my customers this is good for them, and I don't want to tell them that because that would be a lie, and lying is not good for me long term. Abraham Campos, I have heard you mention in passing several times that the U.S. should leave NATO. Could you expand on this? What is your argument against NATO? Has it outlasted its usefulness? Well, it's not clear it ever was useful. That is, it's not clear that the United States ever had a responsibility to defend Europe. That is, this is always the test, why should an American kid die for the sake of defending Estonia? What is his self-interest in defending Estonia? Only if you could show that it was good for America, it protected America. So I think ultimately, it's not clear the United States should have ever been a part of NATO. The Europeans, at least since the 1960s, were wealthy enough to fund it themselves, to protect themselves from the Soviet, without U.S. troops on the ground, without U.S. funding for military force on the ground. And really, NATO constituted a redistribution of wealth from the United States to Europe since then. Maybe in the first few years, Europe couldn't do it. The Soviet Union was a threat, and it was good to stop it, right? It was good to join NATO to stop the Soviet Union. But at some point, Europe could do it themselves. So, and they have the direct interest. You could argue the United States has an indirect interest, but it's pretty indirect. It's like Vietnam. So I just don't think America should fight other people's wars unless there's a direct interest, i.e., not fighting that war constitutes a real threat to the individual rights of Americans. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have supported the Europeans, maybe even subsidized some of their defense, paid for some of their weapons, certainly sold them weapons. But should have we been leading NATO as an organization, funding NATO and putting literal troops on the ground? I'm not sure. I don't think. I'm not sure it makes sense. It certainly doesn't make sense today when Europe is as rich as it is. It hasn't made sense for the last 40 years. Broman, live in Zurich, big tech coming here. I only see negative, more crowded, higher prices, new ugly buildings, taxes haven't gone down. Your view on it? He lives in Zurich. Big tech is moving in. Well, but the negatives are a product of the fact that the city government in Zurich is not allowing for new construction. If you had zoning laws and development laws that allowed for massive new construction of residential units, then prices would not be going up. And the fact that taxes are not going down is a political issue. It's not about big tech. But big tech coming there means that more jobs are available for Swiss, more interesting, worthwhile people are moving in, productive people are moving in. Ultimately, more money will be paid in taxes into the city of Zurich, and maybe they'll fix the roads and expand the roads. And the fact that new buildings are ugly is, your subjective view, or maybe subjective, but you don't get to decide what buildings get built. Developers get to decide that, hopefully, not city governments. So I think you have to look deeper into what's happening, and if there are negative consequences, and I'm sure there are, the reasons for that primarily are government. All of that, right? Prices of bars, cafes are going up because there's probably regulations on how many bars and cafes and so on can open. If prices are going up, it means profits are going up, which means new entrants should enter the field and drive profits and prices down. Why aren't they? Because of zoning and all of that. So, yeah, restrictive regulations by government make economic development have negative effects that they shouldn't have. Economic development should be basically all positive. And in a truly free market, it is. Wes, thank you for the $50 sticker. Really, really, really appreciate that. Thanks for the consistency. You're here almost every day. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Nevfel, for the sticker. Thank you to all the super chatters and all the stickers today. I will see you all tonight. Don't forget, 7 p.m., interview with Phil Magnus on everything you want to know about trade and tariffs and were afraid to ask or weren't afraid to ask. Come with your trade and tariff questions, historical questions, economic questions, questions about the Trump administration. He's really, he knows a lot about this stuff. He's really smart. So challenge him, ask questions. So join me 7 p.m. Eastern time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. I'll see you all there. If not that, then I'll catch you tomorrow. Bye, everybody.